J-horror is a beloved genre with a multitude of classics, ranging from well-known international hits to more obscure stuff. Parasite Eve has become a forgotten J-horror film, and for good reason. Many remember the name from the PlayStation 1 games, which I'll admit is what sparked my initial interest. I knew absolutely nothing about this series or how involved it actually was. I was surprised to find not only was there a film sharing the same name, but it was also a novel. Now, you may be aware that I am the type of person who wants to start anything at its origin point. Knowing that the game is a sequel to the novel means that obviously I have to read the novel first. And I guess watch the movie too. And let me tell you, it was a chore to do so. Buying a physical copy of this novel is damn near impossible to do. It was most certainly worth it though. Parasite Eve is a splendid horror story. I was so excited to look at the film and discuss the story with you, only to find that the film is bad. The novel starts off rather slow, but not without meaning. There's a strong use of realism, coming from the author's background knowledge. Hideaki Senna was a Japanese pharmacologist before writing the novel. The idea came to him on a whim while watching a documentary. A simple what-if scenario. This what if happened to play on the theme of genetic disaster, something that was pretty relevant in 90s J-horror, not unlike The Ring, the actual Ring story. The novel spends its time explaining to its audience in intricate detail the going-ons of kidney transplants and cellular study. I found it not only enlightening, but truly put into perspective the significance of the world that these characters live in. It was effective to see something described in such realistic manner that adding fantasy into it blended in even more convincingly. I have to admit, it is a slow burn, and it may not be appealing to everyone. I personally found that helped build the uneasiness of the story. I feel that many neglect the common trope of everyday life. It's not uncommon for the Japanese to criticize the mundanity of the militantly routine lifestyle of Japan. The Ring, for example, uses a boring, everyday guy as the protagonist to play on this trope. And the movie dulls that down by trying to force a more interesting character, but that's a story for a different day. While both The Ring and Parasite Eve were bad adaptations of their respective source materials, The Ring was competent enough as a film to stand on its own. Let me clarify that a bad adaptation does not necessarily mean a bad film. The Shining is the most famous case of a bad adaptation from book to screen that was actually a really good movie, whereas Parasite Eve was just a complete mess. It garnered quite a bit of popularity at the time. If you asked a Japanese person on the street what color mitochondria was, they'd say green because of the imagery from this film. This film will prove that this story is absolutely ridiculous, and leaving out so much as one detail could jeopardize the entire structure of the story. Without a doubt, there exists the potential for a truly horrifying film based off this book. Did we get that? No. No, we did not. To give a brief synopsis of the story follows Toshiaki, a biological scientist who specializes in studying cells. His wife, Kiyomi, crashes her car on their anniversary, ending up brain dead. Kiyomi is a registered organ donor. We'll talk more about the social views of that in a bit. And Toshiaki is pleaded to give consent to give one of her kidneys to a young girl. He reluctantly agrees, demanding that the surgeon cut out her liver for himself to keep. Toshiaki experiments and studies the cells from Kiyomi's liver, which eventually form their own being. We learn that this is due to the mitochondria. In this story, they are a separate organism that, while initially had a symbiotic relationship with other cellular life, now have evolved to desiring their own independent life form. This is Eve. Kiyomi has always been influenced and controlled by Eve, but now it has manifested itself into its own organic being, which wants to return to the new owner of Kiyomi's kidney, so that she may implant a child in her for a new generation of beings. Parasite Eve apparently suffered from intense studio interference, which is the only reason I can even imagine is why the movie is labeled as a horror romance. This just demonstrates a brutal misunderstanding of the story. The beginning of the film opens with an explanation that isn't even made until halfway throughout the book. That should already alarm us of the horrid pacing we're about to witness. The novel bounces around many webs that all weave together rather elegantly. The story is not told in chronological order, but it never feels disorganized. It feels very well thought out and planned. The film is told more narrowly and still cuts out major sequences that leave the story feeling far more confused than it should. The first act does well to play on the mundanity of Japanese life. It feels as if it were a Japanese drama with sprinkles of eerie moments throughout. I'm probably giving the film more credit than it deserves, because this is just so damn boring. A central character, Mariko, pops up every now and then just to remind us she exists, without serving anything for the narrative. This is perhaps the film's biggest sin. Mariko may appear bratish, but she is central to one of the novel's most important outlooks: how society viewed organ transplantations. In 90s Japan, organ transplantation was a very hot topic. The cultural attitudes were generally negative, believing it was entirely unethical. Mariko herself constantly compares herself to being like Frankenstein's monster, or even recalls a ghost story that terrifies her every night about a spirit which wants to reclaim the organ stolen from its body and was put into a patient. The spirit haunts that patient every night until it can get its heart back. Transplants from donors was a social taboo. It's important to be aware just how negative a view of organ transplantation was at the time to really understand the story. Mariko embodies the negative outlook society has. What is her role in the movie? Well, she's there sometimes. Yeah, that's about it. Oh, and her dad, who is also an important character to the story, gets like 2 appearances in the movie. He also plays a role in showing the social perspective. For instance, his coworkers are constantly pestering him about his daughter and her condition, and it's not exactly a positive interest. In the novel, he originally gave his kidney to his daughter, but she was victim to so much abuse and bullying that she stopped taking her medicines and that kidney failed. This brought about a strained relationship between the father and daughter, and it brings a real emotional edge to the story. I guess none of that was important. I find it hilarious that Mariko is introduced before Kiyomi's accident even happened, which is the actual start of the story. It takes damn near 20 minutes for the actual story to start. I cannot express to you the significance of 20 minutes. Those 20 minutes could have been used for a multitude of scenes. Hell, maybe even give the doctor a break and let one of the 4 characters that they all merged into him exist. Once the story kicks into gear, it serves its purpose. It's rather sad and plays on how horrifying it is to have a loved one end up brain dead. We have pretty good visual representation of Toshiaki dwelling on the morality of making the organ transplantation for Mariko. There's a sick girl who could use Kiyomi's kidney, but there's also the social thought. Toshiaki comes to the decision he will give the consent for Kiyomi's kidney to be transplanted to Mariko, as long as he gets the liver for himself. I'm confident that's definitely illegal, but he just does it, in front of everyone. The only reason that this happened was because the mitochondria were influencing the actions of the characters, and his friend was a surgeon. Instead, he just kind of blackmails the other doctor into doing it. Okay. The next chunk of the film is an occasional scene from the book being adapted with a whole bunch of faux cinema nonsense. Before you know it, 40 minutes into the film and we're already in the final act of the story. I shit you not. They had an hour and a half to do the finale and they still fumbled it. Asakura, believe it or not, is a character. She has motivations and a reason for doing what she does. This movie doesn't really seem to care about her. She gets possessed by Eve 1, not that you really have any indication of what that means, because you have no idea who this character is or what's happening. What I was most excited for was to see how this film would handle the first truly scary moment of the book. The novel does brilliant to build up the tension and keep you in suspense for when Eve will finally make their move. When Eve finally makes its appearance, it's rather disgusting. It's a fleshy substance with tentacle-like qualities. The smell of decayed flesh follows it. The characters damn near vomit every time they see it. The film, we get a piss puddle. This is a well-crafted scene of suspense as the creature slowly inches its way to the aware Asakura, who fumbles from her escape in the lab. I guess they decided to just not do any horror at all from the book into this supposed horror film. The timeline gets totally screwed as Toshiaki proceeds to have sex with the piss puddle. That is definitely not supposed to happen yet, nor is it supposed to be consensual. The next several scenes should be building up the changes in Asakura as she's controlled by Eve 1. She changes her appearance and acts more Kiyomi-like. Toshiaki even sees her with sexual attraction for the first time. Once it comes time for her big presentation, which is a thing that the movie doesn't really build up for you that well, she gives her mitochondria are taking over speech. This is supposed to be a major moment in the story. It's tense and haunting, foreboding. Eve does not warn. She tells the audience that humanity's time is over, then proceeds to demonstrate her ability to set people on fire with spontaneous combustion, which looks about as good as I could have hoped for the time. There's no intensity to this at all. Asakura is also just okay after Eve leaves her body, instead of setting her on fire like the book, just so she can run around for the final act, I guess. After this, Toshiaki is supposed to investigate the lab. That's when Eve 1 takes the appearance of Kiyomi and proceeds to rape Toshiaki, and steals his sperm by manipulating him with Kiyomi's image. Again, this was not a consensual encounter. To make it even more haunting, Eve explains that she has always been influencing Kiyomi's appearance to appeal to Toshiaki. It's truly horrifying to consider Kiyomi's entire existence was a tool of manipulation. Mitochondria truly are parasites. The final act should be a real nail-biter. Toshiaki and the reader have put together Eve's plan. Eve needed Kiyomi to die so that she could escape that body. Now, with her own cell-made organic body, she has a fertilized egg, and she wants to implant the next stage of evolution into Mariko. This is very disturbing as she plans to impregnate a 14-year-old girl. The film actually makes it worse by making her even younger, making her 12. Eve sets 2 nurses on fire and turns them into puddles. Well, we got one. Kinda. She also injures Yoshizuma. Kinda. In the book, she sets his arms on fire. In the movie, a whole computer just explodes on him. Yoshizuma, Mariko's dad, and Toshiaki lead the final confrontation against Eve, which is mainly them trying to figure out where Eve is, while Eve apparently can mold a male appendage and impregnates Mariko. Very Bible Black style. The film's ending is entirely different. In the novel, Eve 1 successfully creates a child in Mariko in the morgue, the basement of the hospital. In the movie, it's on the roof. The complete opposite. The film doesn't even get that far into the finale, and I'm not surprised. Given how scared this movie was to adapt anything from the novel, it's no surprise that they steered away from the most disturbing part of the entire thing. I actually think it would have been impossible to visually create the finale in the 90s. It's pretty difficult to imagine it today, really. In the finale of the novel, Eve 1 dies, and its spawn is born from Mariko within minutes. It grows into an adult almost instantly and is far more powerful. It uses telepathic abilities, manipulating the mitochondria of others, to fling the 3 men across the room, damn near killing all of them. But there's a miscalculation in Eve 1's plan. As it stole Toshiaki's sperm, which had male mitochondria, it fights with the female mitochondria from Eve, making an unstable being. Its desire for perfection has been distorted. Toshiaki takes advantage of the situation and sacrifices himself in a state of paternal emotions. Although really, he's just manipulating the damaged state of Eve. They die together. In the movie, he just makes out with Eve 1, reasoning that Kiyomi still exists, or that Kiyomi still loves him. It's a complete step back from all the hard work of the novel. They both die, and no one cares. There's hardly any weight to it at all. There you have it. A novel about mad science gone wrong, blended excellently with a horror story that makes you consider the infinite amount of creatures living inside of our bodies. An ending that makes you wonder, are there Eves out there? Are they in us? It's not the best J horror story, but it's definitely a unique one and such a fun concept that could have been played into a fantastic film. Instead, we got a snore fest. It is just frankly boring. I was actually dozing off towards the end. Eve is going around setting a bunch of people on fire. Yoshi gets blown up by a computer. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. This is a true case of wasted potential. I'll admit, I don't know much about the video game, but it's fascinating to think that that story was turned into a better game than a movie. I was really hoping I could talk more positively about this movie, but they didn't give me a lot to work with. Have you seen this film before, or are you a fan of the games? I'm interested to know what people who haven't read the novel thought about the film, or maybe those who have read it and feel the same way or differently about the movie. Let me know in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching.